Friends, good afternoon. My name is Ansley Tucker. I am the rector of Christ Church Cathedral and the dean, and it is certainly my pleasure to welcome you to this third in our concert series entitled Earth Songs, Music for Climate Justice. This concert, of course, is entitled Land, and that's not an accident, of course, because we're well aware that this is Earth Day. So it's a good day for us to be making music in favor of the earth. I do want to acknowledge that in this place we live, work, play, and for the cathedral community, pray on the ancestral lands of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples of the Esquimalt and Songhees, First Nations in particular, people who have worked and walked on the earth gently for centuries, keeping it safe and productive for the people who came after them, from whom we can learn much. Just a word about COVID. We are still really recommending in this space, because we come from many places and we're going to be here for more than 15 minutes, that people wear masks at all times, unless you're standing up here making a speech or trying to make an instrument work for you that needs wind. There are 3 more concerts in this series, all of them organ concerts in association with the International Organ Competition. You've got the dates, but they're bunched quite close together, as competitions tend to do. May 27th, June 1st, and June 3rd. And we have an offer for you, but only if you're here in this room. If you would like to have tickets to all 3 of those concerts, we can offer them to you for a total of $40, which is thus a $20 discount. But you need to do that before you go home. So at the end of, I was going to say at the end of the service, I can't help myself. At the end of the concert, you can just check in with the folks at the table at the front doors of the church, and they can help you with that. We're delighted that we will be having people join us who bring their own sort of stature and celebrity to the table. Bob McDonald, the CBC's Quirks and Quarks, will be here as the speaking guest at one of those concerts. So will Kit Pearson, the celebrated children's author who also lives here in Victoria. And one of the musicians is Simon Johnson, the Master of Music at Westminster Cathedral in the UK. So we're promising you some very fine music and some very fine thinking to help us think of these matters that are before us at this time. It is really important that we find ways of putting our words into action. It's probably not just enough to have a lovely piece, you know, with a title like Lament in the Trampled Garden, without also hearing for someone who can speak for the earth and who can call us to support good works that are taking place in the earth's favor. And so in that regard, it's really lovely, and we're very pleased that Andy MacKinnon has agreed to be with us today. He is, as many of you will already know, a forest ecologist. He's a Metchosin councillor, so putting your words out in public, I hope. And chair of the Greater Victoria Public Library Board, and also a prolific and best-selling author. So I know that we're going to want him to speak and me to stop, and he will want to say something to you about the Nature-Based Solutions Foundation. I know he will. So Andy, please welcome him.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for the invitation to join you this evening, and a happy Earth Day to everybody. This is indeed a day of celebration and a wee bit of lamentation, perhaps, for planet Earth. When I was invited to come here tonight, I was asked if there was a charity that I would like to invite people to support, and I'm a science advisor for the Nature-Based Solutions Foundation. I am old enough to have been involved in deliberations and planning around the Great Bear Rainforest Land Use Plan. John O'Riordan, who will be speaking to you later, knows about that time very well. And at the time, a fund of $120 million was established to help First Nations and other local communities find ways to generate employment and revenue by not logging some of their old-growth forests. And this is important to fund these sorts of economic transitions if we want communities to move to more sustainable models of development. And that $120 million has been absolutely instrumental in helping some of these communities move to different relationships with the forests in their traditional territories and around their communities. It's been critical to that transition. And that sort of funding is only available in the Great Bear Rainforest. So the Nature-Based Solutions Foundation is hoping to raise $50 million to help support the transition for some other First Nations in British Columbia that we're working with to find ways to generate employment and revenue by not logging some of the old-growth forests in their traditional territories. And if you're interested in finding out more, I think there's information in the materials that was handed out. My research these days is mostly about the mycorrhizal fungi associated with Garry Oak. And that's a pretty specialized topic, so I thought I'd back up a little bit to something that might be of more general interest to people on this Earth Day, and in fact to tie in with some of the music that you'll hear a bit later tonight. I have remarks that should last about 15 minutes. As Ansley was mentioning, then I'll very quickly get off the stage so you can hear the excellent music that's coming. Thanks to Christ Church Cathedral for hosting this joyous celebration of Earth Song's land. And I'm delighted to be giving the address tonight on the traditional territories of the Esquimalt and Songhees nations. Probably the most famous quote about Victoria is from Sir James Douglas, who was the second governor of the colony of Vancouver Island. Douglas was surveying the Victoria area in the spring of 1842, looking for a potential location for Fort Victoria. And in a letter, he wrote, "The place itself appears a perfect Eden in the midst of the dreary wilderness of the northwest coast, and so different in its general aspect from the wooded, rugged regions around, that one might be pardoned for supposing it had dropped from the clouds in its present location." Now, of course, a perfect Eden is a reference to the Garden of Eden as described in Genesis. And I just smiled when I thought of taking off on this tangent at how my parents would have appreciated me relating catechism topics in a cathedral to a group of people. It's not difficult to understand what Douglas is referring to here. Most of the west coast of North America, from northern California to southeast Alaska, is coastal temperate rainforest. Douglas's wooded, rugged regions, the dreary wilderness of the northwest coast. But a small area of the coast, several 100,000 hectares, lies in the lee of the Vancouver Island Mountains and the Olympic Mountains. Here the climate's mild, being right on the ocean, but relatively dry, with total annual precipitation about a meter or a bit more, in contrast with a place like Tofino, which gets about 3 meters of precipitation a year. You even get a lot more precipitation between here and Souk. It's an incredibly steep ecological gradient. And Victoria also has pronounced summertime droughts. In a November 1843 letter, Douglas wrote that, quote, "No rain fell between the 10th of June and the 8th of September at Fort Victoria, and that the residents of Victoria were, quote, at times badly off for water." Sound familiar? But when Douglas described this area as a perfect Eden, he likely meant that it looked like England. And like England, Douglas's Vancouver Island Eden was not an unmanaged Arcadia, an area where, as Genesis tells us, the Lord God made to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food, and so forth. Southern Vancouver Island was instead a landscape that was intensively managed by the Coast Salish First Nations. It was not a wilderness. It was an agricultural landscape. And it was a landscape that was regularly, and in some cases annually, burned by First Nations in order to maintain a mix of woodland, shrub, steppe, and grasslands. As a local example, the Songhees lit fires every summer to burn off the grasses and shrubs in what we call today Beacon Hill Park. These managed areas had Gary oaks to produce acorns, open meadows of camas and other lilies with edible bulbs, grazing lands for deer and sight lines for deer hunters, and so much more. It was indeed an earthly paradise, but not an unmanaged Eden. Right around the turn of the 20th century, Aboriginal burning of the landscapes around southeastern Vancouver Island stopped. This was largely because of complaints from early settlers. As an example, Souk resident and notable crank Walter Calhoun Grant wrote in 1851, quote, "The savages have an abominable habit of burning the woods," unquote. He was annoyed by, quote, "the frequency of the fires kindled promiscuously by the natives, both in wood and prairie," unquote. There were also lots of complaints in the journals of early settlers about the smoke that seasonally filled the skies around Fort Victoria. Now, with apologies, a brief history lesson. The colony of Vancouver Island joined British Columbia in 1866, the year before Canadian Confederation. BC joined Canada in 1871. One of the terms of union required that within 2 years, the federal government was to start the construction of a railway from the, quote, seaboard of British Columbia, unquote, wherever that might be, joining the new province and Victoria with the railway system of Canada. In exchange, BC granted to the federal government approximately 300,000 hectares of public land on Vancouver Island, and more elsewhere, up to 32 kilometers along either side of the railway line between Esquimalt and Nanaimo. In 1884, up steps shrewd businessman Robert Dunsmuir, negotiating with Dominion officials to form the Esquimalt and Nanaimo Railway Company. President, Robert Dunsmuir. Half owner, Robert Dunsmuir. He was certainly more interested in what was above ground, timber and coal, below ground, than he was about railways. And the transfer of this vast swath of land from public to private hands explains why, while BC is 94% public lands, pending settlement of land claims, our part of British Columbia is about 93% private lands. The Hulkaminum Treaty Group, representing 6 Coast Salish First Nations, described this land transfer as, quote, an act of egregious piracy. So you might debate today whether this was a good thing for the government of British Columbia to do, but of course there's an awful lot of debate about whether it was their land to give. So, what do you get when you combine one of the most desirable climates in Canada with a removal of fire from a largely privately owned land base? You get early and abundant settlement from other parts of Canada, other parts of the globe, and the conversion of forests to agricultural land and agricultural land to urban areas. You get Greater Victoria. Now, BC is one of the most climatically and ecologically diverse areas in the entire world. Our province has 16 distinct ecological zones. One of the smallest is the area that we call home, the Rain Shadow Coast, or the coastal Douglas Fir Zone. It includes most of southeastern Vancouver Island and the southern Gulf Islands. In the coastal Douglas Fir Zone, we have the largest number of at-risk species and ecosystems of any ecological zone in British Columbia and probably in Canada. So you combine this with the fact that we have one of the smallest percentages of protected areas in this zone, less than 1% of original old-growth forest, and all of this in one of the few provinces in Canada without any legislation to protect endangered species, and the situation is dire. Another challenge, creating new protected areas in the only ecological zone where almost all the land is privately owned and almost always prohibitively expensive. Again, a situation I'm sure everybody here is familiar with. The challenge of protecting species and restoring ecosystems in this, our perfect Eden, sometimes seems overwhelming. Is it perhaps another reference to a perfect Eden that the Emily Carr String Quartet this afternoon will be performing Lament in the Trampled garden? But I hope you didn't think that I was going to leave you in a state of despair on Earth Day. Many of the people who choose to live in this most magnificent part of the globe have devoted themselves to its protection and restoration. A few examples, perhaps, to inspire us today. In terms of protection, the CRD Parkland Acquisition Fund. Since it was established in 2000, approximately 4,800 hectares of land has been protected as CRD parks, including such magnificent wilderness areas as the Souk Hills Wilderness and the Sea-to-Sea Greenbelt. And just in the last year, the 20-hectare Mountain Road Forest in Saanich, protected by CRD Parks and the Habitat Acquisition Trust in 2021, the 5-hectare Flycatcher Forest on Pender Island, protected by Raincoast Conservation Foundation and the Pender Island Conservancy in 2021, the 27-hectare Cable Bay property on Galiano Island, protected by the Nature Trust of British Columbia and the Galiano Conservancy Association in 2022, and underway, the 240-hectare Forest Trust for the Children of Cortes Island, planned by the Forest Trust for the Children of Cortes Island Society, of course. I like to think that people will look back decades and centuries from now with gratitude on what these groups have accomplished. For example, James Douglas set aside land as a protected area in 1858. Today, we call it Beacon Hill Park. It was actually established as a park by the Victoria Council in 1882, I believe. You may not remember much of what Victoria Council accomplished in 1882, but I think a lot of people would thank them for that. Once these areas are protected, an awful lot of them require restoration. Probably the most common restoration activity locally is invasive plant species control. Remember the fellow from Souk, Walter Calhoun Grant, who was complaining about the annual burning by the First Nations? He is, in all likelihood, the person who brought Scotch broom to us here on the South Island. Thank you, Walter. There are restoration projects going on, for example, on the seaside dune systems on Sydney Island and at Whitty's Beach in Metchosin, removing invasive vegetation and reestablishing communities, including threatened and endangered plant species like the contorted pod evening primrose and the yellow sand verbena and its accompanying moth. And to bring us full circle, another critically important component of restoration in our landscapes is the reintroduction of burning. Two examples locally, Nature Conservancy of Canada's Garry Oak Preserve at Quamachin Lake near Maple Bay, where they have been doing experimental and operational burns now for almost a decade. And much more recently, the Department of National Defense, who have been working on restoration of Garry Oak ecosystems on some of their properties, including, I think, very bravely and most operationally at Rocky Point, which is, people are sometimes a little nervous about reintroducing fire because of the chance that it might get away. Well, of course, Rocky Point is a munitions depot. So you have to admire the DND for being so bold in an area like that. Now, when I say that these organizations protect land or restore land, of course, what I mean is that thousands of dedicated volunteers protect and restore land. Individuals just like you, individuals who have taken to heart Earth Day 2022's theme, invest in our planet. Investing time, energy, and for those who can, dollars in our planet. On this Earth Day, let's recognize that we live in one of the most benevolent and most altered landscapes in Canada. And let's celebrate the selfless efforts of all who work to protect and restore it. Thanks.
Andy, thank you for making us think that big ideas are not beyond our reach, and for being here. Just a reminder, he really didn't plug his selected cause as much as I thought he might. If you would like to contribute to Nature-Based Solutions Foundation, you'll find the information on the inside page of your program, again, order of service. And if you just simply go to their website, and it will be very easy for you to donate there if you would like to do so. I am about to call on the Emily Carr String Quartet. This is their third and last concert with us in this series. We've been delighted to be working with them for a couple of years now in other collaborations, and it's just been wonderful to have such a high quality quartet of string players right in our midst here in BC, and certainly for us here in this cathedral. This past week was the 16th anniversary. You're all hidden behind somewhere, but I hope somebody over there is nodding that yes, it's their 16th anniversary The first piece on the program this evening will be, as you have heard now a couple of times, Lament in the Trampled Garden. It is by Marjan Mozetic, and it won a Juno Award as for composition. So sit back, and be prepared for, it's not Brahms. You get Brahms in the second half, right? Be prepared for music that speaks to our situation in lots of ways. Please come, we're waiting for you. Now we'll just give them a minute to rest their shoulders and their fingers. And we can't do these things all by ourselves. You all know this. If you've any interest at all in music and mounting musical productions, let alone inviting people to come into your midst, you know. So, and that is true in this case. This whole series has been very greatly underwritten by the Gail O'Riordan Climate and Arts Legacy Fund at the Victoria Foundation. And I know that John, who's Gail's wife, is here and has been at these concerts. And I'd love him to tell you just a little bit about what the family had in mind in setting up this fund. So John, where did you go? I saw you were right there. There you are, right in front of me. Please, so pleased to welcome you and so grateful for your support.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and happy Earth Day from Climate and the Arts. I'm very pleased to be sharing the podium with my friend Andy MacKinnon, because Andy and I worked together with BC Government for many years on areas of environment and sustainability, and he talked about the Great Bear Rainforest. So it was wonderful to have his commentary on the history of ecology in Victoria. I'm here to talk about climate and the arts and two inserts that we put into your programs. One called 58 Solutions from the Creatively United for the Planet group, and a smaller insert which is it's also in your program. Today is Earth Day is very auspicious because 2 years ago on Earth Day, we created the partnership with Creatively United, and the organization genius behind Creatively United is Francis Lippman, who is sitting here in the audience. But we were scheduled to put a major concert on Earth Day in 2020 in a farm near Nanaimo. But of course that had to be cancelled because of COVID. So we quickly switched to doing a number of webinars. And over the last 2 years, between Earth Day of 2020 and Earth Day of 2022, we've done something like 50 webinars where we've shared stories on how we link climate and the arts. I want to say about this morning's webinar was the most recent of that, and that was created by a panel of young people coordinated by Ella Kim Marriott, who is our social media coordinator with the Climate and the Arts and Creatively United. And they did a wonderful job of looking at what they're doing in advancing climate stories and actively engaged in their communities in making things happen, working closely with the elected officials and the community. So that webinar is recorded, and you can go to it by going to creativelyunitedfortheplanet.org, which is one of the inserts in your program. I also want to thank Christ Church Cathedral and the Emily Carr String Quartet for their courage and innovation to have this series on climate justice. I was very pleased to promote that as part of the legacy. And let me just say a couple of words about my wife, Gail, because she was a consummate musician, played with the symphony for 30 years. She was a personal friend of all of the 4 members of the quartet and had a vision of 3 parts. One was that we have to live within nature's limits. Secondly, that our self-interest has to be aligned with the planetary interest. In other words, what we do today individually, we must be thinking about how does that sustain the planet on the long term. And to put it succinctly, we have to make choices that heal the planet, not steal the planet. And the third thing that she believed is that arts was a great communicator and a great way of motivating people to become engaged. So we've done a number of things with the Emily Carr String Quartet, one of which was a film called Trees Matter, and you can see that film when you go to the Creatively United website. But the Emily Carr String Quartet was a group of musicians together with the Victoria Symphony and the Victoria Philharmonic Choir that provided the music for a short video, about 12 minutes, on why trees matter in urban settings. It was sponsored in part by the City of Victoria, and is a wonderful story of how important trees are to environment and the need to protect them and to plant them. And this is parallel to a second video that we put together called the Forest Ballet, which was done in conjunction with the Ballet Victoria and Anne Mortifi, a singer-songwriter from the north part of the island. Again, you can see that video on Creative United. So I encourage you to look at these because they're wonderful memories of what we can do in combining music and the arts. And I actually have longer-term plans in my relationship with working with the Christ Church Cathedral and the Emily String Quartet, and I hope that we will be able to announce these relatively soon. But going to the second insert in your program, this little thing, I just want to point out that part of Gail's vision is there has to be an alignment between the individual, that's you and I, the community that we work in, which is in this case Greater Victoria. That then there's a relationship between the community and the nation, the Canadian and provincial and federal governments. And finally, a relationship between the governments that we operate in Canada with the global government, and that dealing with climate change involves a continuum of action from the individual through the community, through the nation state to the globe, and that we can't solve the climate issue individually or at any one level. We have to solve it at all the levels. So what we've done in this little handout is showing you how we've combined with two other groups, that's Creatively United and Climate and the Arts, to look at ways which individuals can take action about improving their carbon footprint and living with nature. So if I'm not necessarily suggesting you should do it now, but if you, with your smartphone, if you hover over the QR, the quick reader icons at the bottom of the page, just hover your phone over that, you'll see on your phone the website. So click on the website and then you can immediately download all of the information that's in these three icons. So that it's a very quick way of learning about lighter living. And there's many, many good tips about how you can change the way you operate on an individual basis without a lot of major disruption to your life, but collectively they can make a huge difference to the way we work and protect our environment. I just want to talk about two things in that are important. One is that there is a One Planet Challenge. So one of the websites is about the so-called One Planet nature, that we live in one planet, and in order to live sustainably in one planet, we have to reduce our footprint by about 2/3 in order to sustain that planet. But there's a One Planet Challenge for students that allows kids, so your kids or your grandkids, to anywhere between grade 6 and 12, to submit their ideas in video or illustration, how we can bring one planet living ideas to our communities and to our personal lives. And this is being done in collaboration with the District of Saanich and the City of Victoria. And student submissions are being accepted through until May 20th, 2022, so it's a month from now. And there are cash prizes, so that students who are very inventive and imaginative in what they're submitting have the ability to earn up to part of $1,200 in cash prizes. So if you have kids that you know are in the grade 6 to 12, it'd be wonderful to get them engaged in this. It's a great way of educating them and learning about the importance of the environment in their lives today and in the future. And then on this, one of the other websites, on lighter living, there's a number of different ways in which communities can get together, and we've got 7 different activities that communities can engage in that not only brings them together, but actually makes a difference in the way they interact. And one of the things that they're talking about is that when you have a major life change, something that's big in your life, for example, selling a house or refurnishing a house or making a major change to a different city, you have to sort of change the way you do business, that's a really useful opportunity to think about recycling, reusing, lightening your footprint. And you can make a major difference if you think thoughtfully about some of these life experiences and how you can recreate your life in a lighter way. So we would encourage you to put your phones onto these QR codes, download these fabulous websites, and get more information about how you can live lighter over the next, for the balance of your life, and we'll all be better off for it. And finally, I just want to say that there's, in Climate and the Arts, is one more webinar in our series this year, and it's on the 26th of May, so it's roughly a month from now. And it's on the theme of we're all in this together, so what's next? So all in this together was that concept of that continuum between the local, the individual, the community, and the nation states. And what's next is, well, what can we do collectively about this? So this webinar is going to be presenting a world-class group of thoughtful people, including some youth, who will talk about what they think will make us work more collectively together, how we can still make a difference, even though time is beginning to run out. So let's keep hopeful and keep active. So thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you.